Over the past few months, I've been seeing a lot of discussion on whether remakes are actually a bad thing. And while I think it's very easy to overlook these kinds of posts, I also think it's kind of worth discussing whether remakes are actually good or bad, especially with the increase in frequency of us seeing remakes and remasters in the gaming industry.
No, I'm doing this for art.
Let's get one thing out of the way first. This is entirely subjective. There, in my opinion, is no winning argument here. One of the primary things about remakes that I've seen being talked about is the original creator's vision. Video games are an art form, and that means that there is creative direction and vision when a game is made. Remakes can take away from that vision, whether it's in gameplay, art direction, presentation, or really any of the other factors. Remakes are not always done by the same team that made the original game. Even if the original director's involved, sometimes other team members within that group are not involved anymore, and that can muddy up the idea of whether the artistic vision is preserved, because a video game is a culmination of everyone's creative ideals. So it's very difficult to say whether certain remakes actually do hold to the creator's original vision. And I think in a lot of cases, it's kind of a compelling argument, especially if you're looking at games as an art form. Should we not respect the original creative direction and vision? What are the elements that are important to that? And were there any original ideas that were restricted by the technology of the time? All of these are important questions to ask when judging a remake in this way.
This power of mine is yours!
And generally the biggest argument I've seen for remakes is accessibility. In this case, I'm more referring to the availability of a game. As an example, we're going to use Persona 3 Reload, which is a remake of Persona 3. Persona 3 FES, which is not totally a definitive edition of Persona 3, but close enough, I suppose, was only available on emulators, PS2, and PS3. A confusing case indeed, because Persona 3 Portable, which is a PSP version of Persona 3, was made available for PC a year prior to Reload's release. However, I do believe that Portable is a different experience in a lot of ways because of the way the game plays. It's much more of a point-and-click kind of style of game. Reload created a way to play Persona 3 on modern platforms without emulation and without the playstyle that Portable offers. In that way, it's promoting the accessibility of a game to new players who don't have a 20-year-old console. Or 15-year-old console. So yeah, it basically makes Persona 3, in some ways its fullest form, available on modern platforms. And in other ways, not in its fullest form. But I'm not really talking about the content of the game as much as the way the game plays. Which, speaking of, if we're putting aside artistic vision, accessibility can also refer to how a game plays, especially for remakes. Continuing to use Persona 3 as an example, between its 3 iterations there are various gameplay differences. FES plays mostly like a standard Hashino Persona title, moving around the world, dungeon crawling, social sim aspects, and whatnot. However, in battle you cannot control your party members. Portable is much more point-and-click in terms of overworld movement, but everything else remains pretty much the same as the regular game, except that you can control your party members in battle. Reload kind of combines the two, basically with the regular overworld movement and all that is in FES, and then party member control that's in Portable. Now, which one is better, it's a divisive argument within the community, but that's not really what I'm here for or here to discuss. The point I'm trying to make is that remakes often modernize and alter aspects of the original to keep them more in line with the current times. This makes the games more accessible and more up to par with the standards of the modern age. And is that a good or a bad thing? Well, that's entirely up to you. For the most part, if we're talking from gameplay perspectives, one of the things and one of the reasons a lot of games modernize their gameplay in some way, shape, or form is because people's standards are defined by what they've really played recently. And a lot of the time, if something doesn't measure up to that, people aren't gonna like it that much.
We gotta be overthinking things.
Truly, the main thing I see circling back whenever we talk about this is the vision, the creative vision of the game. More specifically, of the original. Which I think also comes down to an important question of, was the team able to achieve their vision in the full original release? To some people, remakes can seem very corporate. Re-releasing a product that's already out isn't as monumental of a task compared to making something new. And it can feel like companies want to bank on your nostalgia, so their wallets become fatter, and they don't have to do as much work, or spend as much money. The thing is, the whole debate is highly subjective, both to a game being remade, and to the people who want to play it and don't want to play it. Something like Final Fantasy VII Remake is... I don't really know if it's divisive, because I haven't played Remake yet, but it can seem very corporate because of how it's divided into 3 parts. Definitely seen that argument before. But many people see it as a greatly expanded experience from the original, and it leaves them with new ways to enjoy their favorite title in the franchise. In the end, it's wholly up to you to decide how you feel about a remake. To me, remakes are not inherently bad, at least in the space of video games. If we're talking about other media like movies, there are some pretty awful remakes and a lot of unnecessary ones. But it's because of that interactive element of video games that separates it from other forms of media that make remakes not necessarily a bad thing. That part is always going to age, and some games age well and require very little tweaking to keep them up to standard, while others are rough and need a heavy bit of changes to make them feel like a modern game. Again, there's not going to be a right or wrong answer to this. People have different tolerances for interactive stuff in video games. Some people really like certain games, and other people say the controls are clunky. Again, it's a matter of perspective. But of course, that doesn't absolve remakes in the video game industry. There are a lot of ones that are completely unnecessary. For one, the low-hanging fruit and the obvious example is The Last of Us 1 remake. You could say, well, the game is 10 years old, and sure, it's a decade old. Back during last gen, if you had told me a game was 10 years old and they remade it, I would kind of understand. However, nowadays, the line gets a little more blurred. Technology is advancing at a rapid pace. The visuals of video games really haven't changed that much. A lot of late PS3 generation games look fine and don't need remakes. A remaster maybe, like a up-res and textures maybe, but a remake just seems wasteful, I suppose. A lot of these games still look good and are readily available on modern platforms and still play perfectly fine. You could argue that The Last of Us 1 technically wasn't available on PC or PS5, but if a backwards compatible version exists, I don't think it matters. You could buy the PS4 version of The Last of Us Remastered, and it doesn't make a difference. It still looks good. That rumor of a Black Flag remake that's been going around for a while is another wholly unnecessary remake of something you can still buy on modern platforms, and it's completely playable and still up to standards. Anyways, my main point is, remakes are not inherently bad, but some remakes are bad ideas. In my eyes, the easiest way not to support a remake is, obviously, not to play it or buy it. Whether we like it or not, remakes will continue to happen as long as the industry exists. I'm not here to spew some meaningless hatred for one particular game. I just think the topic itself is interesting because it can bring forth meaningful discussion, doesn't always bring forth meaningful discussion, and it can bring up sources of official developer comments on creative visions and remakes. Something that I think we lack. Official sources, I mean. Because a lot of stuff is just someone posting, yeah, well, the director said this, and there's no source. There's no source telling me where that comment comes from, so how am I supposed to believe it? My stance, as I said, is that I think remakes are mostly a good thing due to the interactive element that video games share, but I do wish more resources and thought went into what games get remade, because there are a lot of games that could use the visual facelift or the gameplay update or the accessibility for it to be on modern platforms, as opposed to the games getting chosen for remakes. But that's just me. I haven't seen that many remakes that I think are a bad idea. So, anyways, let me know what you think about remakes in the comments down below. If you have a game specific that you want to talk about, that's even better. And you could leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe to the channel if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.
Let me help.
My thanks.
Trust me.
I owe you. I'll use what I must.
Looks like we can't brute force through this one.
Hellfire!